The front has collapsed. Russia is advancing at a furious pace, only 27 kilometers from Sumy. A sensation. Putin has agreed to a personal meeting with Zelenskyy. But there's a catch. China is increasing its supply of drone components to Russia. Putin is preparing for a major war, and Russia is urgently modernizing its nuclear arsenal. Trump's team has stated that they understand Russia's concerns and that Ukraine will never join NATO. Hello, my name is Katerina Nestorenko. Subscribe to our channel. Here you'll find only truthful news, and like this video if you support Ukraine. Less than 3 kilometers to the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region and a future large-scale offensive in the Sumy region. While the world discusses the political aspect of the war in Ukraine, the front is relentlessly moving. The deep state map shows that the Russians have only 2 and 6 kilometers left to reach the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. After occupying the villages of Romanivka and Troitske, the Russians also advanced in the Donetsk region. Alongside their plan to capture the entire Donetsk region, there is another priority direction where the Russians are eager to advance and are already making progress, and that is the Sumy region. To this end, Russia has already amassed significant forces at the border.
In fact, the enemy really does have such a large number of their forces and resources, both in terms of personnel and equipment, within the Kursk region in particular. And at one time, the buildup began back when Russia was trying and attempting to push out the Ukrainian defense forces who were conducting their operation within the Kursk area. That's why the enemy continues to keep them there. We periodically observe certain changes, perhaps occasionally in the number both of enemy servicemen and of equipment in this sector. But again, the enemy currently has sufficient military forces stationed there to potentially carry out actions against our border in order to actually attempt a significant and coordinated attack on Ukrainian territory.
Attacks on the Sumy region will only intensify with each passing day, because, as reported by the New York Times, Russia aims to seize as much Ukrainian territory as possible before the weather deteriorates and their equipment supplies run out. After that, she will be ready for serious negotiations.
Some Western analysts claim that Mr. Putin may be using the dry season, which is most favorable for offensive operations, to maximize his bargaining power before giving more weight to peace talks later this year. They argue that for Russia, which has held the advantage on the battlefield for most of the past 2 years, it would be rational to use military pressure as leverage in any negotiations.
But Russia also wants to intensify its offensive in the Kharkiv region. All of this is part of Russia's planned summer offensive, which it has already begun. And within the 4-month window mentioned by Western media, according to journalist and commentator Vitaly Portnikov, Putin has set 3 objectives.
The first objective remains unchanged, and Putin set it for his army back in February 2022, when he made the decision for the so-called major assault on Ukraine. This is to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine, which Russia at the time also referred to as the so-called People's Republics. The second objective may be related to the creation of a so-called buffer zone, which Putin has already mentioned as an important goal of this war. And now all this talk about a buffer zone may reflect Moscow's desire to expand the occupied territory of Ukraine and prepare it for a new annexation. So when the head of the Russian delegation at the negotiations in Istanbul, Vladimir Medinsky, warned the Ukrainian negotiators that soon Russia might demand not 5, but 7 or even 8 Ukrainian regions, he was not lying. At least these are exactly the objectives that Putin is setting for his army. The third, very important point related to the Russian offensive right now is the pressure on the Ukrainian delegation at the negotiations. It is pressure on the Ukrainian authorities to ultimately make them agree to unfavorable terms and to make them understand that there is no alternative except for Ukraine's capitulation.
But, as those same Western publications write, despite successes in Donetsk region, Russia will not be able to achieve such active advances either in the Sumy direction or in the Kharkiv direction. And one of the reasons for this is the preparation of the armed forces of Ukraine in the region. At the beginning of March, fortifications were built in critical directions. They are still being built and continuously reinforced. This new line of defense is based on the tactic of deep attritional defense.
In the section from Zoloty Kolodiaz to Izium Pechenihi, the strongest line consists of 3 anti-tank ditches. Behind it are dragon's teeth and in front a line of barbed wire. As for the Novi Donbass line, there are several features that are common to each of its sections. The line is reinforced with urban strongpoints, meaning it is built on positions that are worth defending. It is located behind rivers, on commanding hills, and at topographically narrow points.
All of this is meant to exhaust the Russian tactical offensive potential and buy time. Let's support the defense forces with a donation, or write a few kind words to our defenders in the comments and give this video a like. I know they're watching and reading us. Putin is ready to meet with Zelenskyy. Well, almost. But let's take it one step at a time. Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that Putin, and I quote, in principle supports the possibility of a personal meeting with Zelenskyy. But guess what? That's right, there are conditions.
Putin is ready for negotiations on Ukraine at the highest level, but first, results must be achieved in direct talks between the delegations.
Before Putin dares to crawl out of his bunker, the Kremlin wants to see some results from the delegation-level negotiations before a meeting with the president of Ukraine. And it seems to me that the result acceptable to Russia is capitulation. Well, in that case, the meeting is cancelled. Although, who are we kidding? Putin would never have gone anywhere. He already threatened to come and talk to Zelenskyy. I think there's no need to remind you that these threats and promises from Putin are empty words. The summer promises to be hot, and we're not talking about the weather at all. Russia is preparing massive shelling of Ukraine, and according to the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, Andriy Kovalenko, we're talking specifically about missile attacks.
Recently, the enemy has received only 350 KN-23 ballistic missiles from North Korea. And for this, the enemy doesn't even necessarily have to produce them. They are still receiving these ballistic missiles directly from North Korea. Besides that, if we talk about numbers, as of May 2025, the enemy has the capability to produce approximately 60 Iskander-M missiles per month, specifically ballistic ones. Despite the fact that sanctions are in place and production is complicated, accordingly, the enemy does have the capability to produce them, and the focus is clearly on ballistic missiles rather than cruise missiles. Although the enemy also has a sufficient stockpile of cruise missiles.
We should not forget about drones either, the production of which Russia has also significantly increased.
Last year, the Kremlin was producing about 300 Shahed drones per month. Now the same number is being produced in less than 3 days. Ukrainian military intelligence claims to have documents indicating that Russia plans to increase drone production to 500 per day. This means that mass attacks involving 1,000 units could become a reality.
And besides the Russians' desire to indiscriminately strike at civilians, the Kremlin does have one specific goal. According to Russian war correspondents, a strike could be launched on Zhytomyr, justifying it by the presence of drone operator training centers in the city.
We want to solve the problem with enemy UAVs. It won't be possible to do without strikes on Zhytomyr. The 190th Training Center for UAV operators is located in Zhytomyr. It's not the only one in all of Ukraine, but strikes should start with it. In 2024, the center came under the jurisdiction of the SBS of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. There are many buildings there, and a large number of Nazis are being trained. Plus, there is a centralized production of enemy UAVs there. In short, it needs to be hit hard.
So Ukrainians respond to air raid alerts. Russia has no intention of stopping. It's clear why Ukraine wants to join NATO, but Russia's concerns are also understandable. While Russia is issuing ultimatums demanding that Ukraine abandon its plans to join the North Atlantic Alliance, the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, says that Russia's concerns are justified.
These are legitimate concerns, and we have talked about this repeatedly. We have said that for us, Ukraine's accession to NATO is not up for discussion, and we are not the only country saying this. I could probably name 4 NATO countries for you. And in order for you to be allowed to join NATO, you need the approval of 32 out of 32 member countries of the alliance.
Well, we've already heard that. And the repetition of this statement was obvious. Still, I don't know how to comment on this, but I do know for sure that somewhere in the Kremlin, Putin and his cronies are very pleased with such statements because the dictator really wants Ukraine to give up on NATO. As Reuters reported the day before, Putin wants a written commitment from major Western countries not to expand NATO eastward. And this doesn't concern only Ukraine.
3 Russian sources stated that Putin wants to obtain a written commitment from major Western countries not to expand the US-led NATO alliance eastward. This is essentially a formal exclusion of membership for Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and other former Soviet republics.
What do you think? Will the West agree to Putin's terms, or will they still stand up for Ukraine's NATO membership? China is blocking the sale of Mavic drones to Ukraine, despite its supposed neutrality, and promises not to supply anything to Russia for the war. Beijing has reduced supplies of certain drone components to Western buyers, but is increasing shipments to Russia. According to Bloomberg, citing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, these drones are now virtually unavailable to Ukraine, while Russia receives them without any issues.
China also appears to have reduced shipments of certain drone components, such as magnets used in motors, to Western buyers, while simultaneously increasing supplies to Russia.
According to the publication, citing European officials, Zelensky's statements are accurate.
And considering that drones have become a central element of the war in Ukraine, the lack of drones like the Mavic is a problem.
Although the Mavic is usually used for aerial photography, it can be adapted to carry explosives.
That's why on the battlefield, they are used both for surveillance and for attacking enemy targets.
But it's not just about drones. According to Zelenskyy, cooperation between Russia and China is only gaining momentum. Ukraine has concrete evidence of Chinese citizens working at factories in Russia that produce strike drones. According to him, these UAVs are then used by the Russian army to shell Ukraine. China, of course, denies supplying Russia with lethal weapons and components for their production.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ammunition, equipment and manpower.
The partnership between Russia and North Korea continues to develop at a rapid pace.
And here the numbers speak for themselves. In just a year and a half of war, Kim Jong-un has sent his dictator friend nearly 9 million shells.
These figures are cited by the UN in a new report.
According to available data, since the beginning of September 2023, when the North Korean regime began supplying Russia with ammunition, representatives of dictator Kim Jong-un have delivered to the Kremlin more than 20,000 containers of munitions and related equipment to support the war against Ukraine. In addition, the document states that from January 1st to mid-December 2024, cargo ships flying the Russian flag transported 9 million artillery and multiple rocket launcher munitions from North Korea to Russia in 49 separate shipments. After that, they were transported by rail from Far Eastern ports to ammunition depots in the southwest of the Russian Federation for use by Russian occupiers against Ukraine.
The UN's assessment differs somewhat from the data provided by Ukraine's foreign intelligence. I must admit, the UN's figures are frightening. Just 3 days ago, the head of Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Ole Ivashchenko, spoke about 6 million shells. In addition, according to Ivashchenko, North Korea has significantly increased the supply of personnel, and now it's not just about soldiers, but also specialists for Russian defense industry enterprises, including aircraft manufacturing, as well as labor for agriculture.
Our relations with North Korea, with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, well, they are our neighbors. We will continue to develop our relations, whether someone likes it or not.
What do you think? How far could the cooperation between Putin and Kim Jong-un go? Russia is massively modernizing its army and preparing for a global war. According to the German publication Der Spiegel, a large-scale modernization of the armed forces is underway in Russia, covering the entire country. The Kremlin is building new military facilities and upgrading infrastructure, which may indicate preparations for a global conflict. Our correspondent Julia Kokan looked into the situation.
The German magazine Spiegel has released another sensational report. Journalists publish satellite images and intelligence data warning that Moscow is carrying out a large-scale restructuring of its army across the country and preparing for a global war. According to the publication, hundreds of new facilities have been built across Russia: barracks, command centers, watchtowers, warehouses, as well as kilometers of underground tunnels, and silos have been modernized for the avant-garde hypersonic system. At the same time, German analysts emphasize that despite its scale, the modernization mostly compensates for outdated Soviet facilities and does not disrupt the global balance between nuclear powers. The statements about Russia preparing for a world war and the Spiegel article were also commented on by Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council. According to him, all of this indicates that Europe does not understand the real threats at all.
When the German Spiegel writes that the Kremlin is preparing for a world war, I once again see that Europe does not understand the real threats at all, when these threats are not so much about the Russian army or its weapons as such. Moscow will not have the resources to fight on its own even in 4 to 6 years. The main threat is the Russian army, which could include North Korean troops, as well as the development of drones with Chinese artificial intelligence and other types of weaponry. The focus is on quantity, which Russia can only achieve with the support of third countries, as well as changes in their armies.
And that is already a different Spiegel article. Journalists claim that the Russians are modernizing nuclear weapon storage facilities, relying on Western companies. Spiegel obtained documents from the Russian tender database containing numerous blueprints for the expansion of nuclear weapon bases near Russia's Yasny, which detail the arrangements as well as the materials to be used for construction. There is also information about who is supposed to supply all of this. But let's take it step by step. These documents show for the first time that the Russian military is using products from Western companies at some of the most secret facilities in the world: cement, plaster, adhesives, insulation, and so on. Products from the German company Knauf are especially popular, a company that has repeatedly made headlines due to its ties to the Putin regime. Journalists note that the foundation of Moscow's nuclear deterrence consists of about 900 strategic nuclear warheads stored in underground facilities. Added to these is the new avant-garde weapon, specifically a fast and highly maneuverable warhead that is deployed and launched by an intercontinental ballistic missile. According to satellite images, the facilities now appear larger, more powerful, more modern, and better protected than before. Bases like the one in Yasny have already been partially equipped with the avant-garde.
European intelligence has concluded that some missile facilities have been equipped with new sensor technology and improved protective devices. For example, the silos housing the avant-garde systems have been fundamentally redesigned, are better protected, and are made from higher quality materials.
The publication claims that the orders come from the main military construction departments under the Russian Ministry of Defense. The fact that this database is accessible indicates that a certain degree of transparency is Moscow's goal. They want to show what they have. At the same time, the New York Times writes that against the backdrop of new peace talks with Ukraine, Russia has likely launched a large-scale summer offensive. After all, in May, Russian troops are advancing at their fastest pace since November 2024. The article states that, according to deep state analysts, the occupiers' daily advance has averaged 14 square kilometers. This is twice as much as in April. The main pressure from the invaders was concentrated in the Donetsk region, where they managed to break through the Ukrainian defenses between Pokrovsk and Toretsk. The Russians are advancing toward the last logistical hubs of the armed forces of Ukraine in the region. At the same time, the New York Times notes that Russia used the winter lull to build up reserves of equipment, improve communications, and enhance the technical capabilities of strike drones. The drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities this spring are the most massive since the beginning of the war. In addition, the occupiers have opened another front in northern Ukraine.
The Kremlin has not directly commented on the offensive or officially announced its start. Putin only stated that his troops are creating a buffer zone with Ukraine to protect Russian civilians from enemy raids. He also repeated his mantra that the war will only end when Russia eliminates the root causes of the conflict.
Russia continues to expand the so-called buffer zone. According to deep state analysts, in the Sumy region, the occupiers have advanced near Novosilka, Vodology, as well as in the areas of Lokhnya and Bilovody. From the gray zone to Sumy, there are only 27 kilometers left. In the northern direction of the Kharkiv region, Russian troops are operating in small assault groups, trying to identify weak points in the Ukrainian defense. There are currently no signs of preparations for a full-scale offensive in this direction, according to the Khartia Brigade.
There is no significant buildup of enemy forces and equipment. We do not expect a large-scale offensive in our direction. At the same time, the enemy is replenishing these forces and resources in order to find a gap in the defense and carry out a more massive assault. In recent weeks, there have been several enemy attempts to launch assaults, but these attempts were unsuccessful. Both equipment and infantry were destroyed.
After Ukraine, Russia's next target could be Finland. The occupiers are amassing troops at the border. This was stated by U.S. Presidential Representative Keith Kellogg.
Yesterday, I was with the Finnish ambassador. I went to the residence and we had lunch. And the Russians are indeed building up their forces on their border. Now, Finland has the longest border with Russia, and they are clearly facing issues as well.
But that's not all. Additionally, Kellogg stated that the issue of Ukraine joining NATO is not being considered. According to him, the U.S. is ready to discuss with Russia the non-expansion of the alliance to the east. Well, as we can see, the situation is quite tense. And what do you think the Russians are actually planning? Write your thoughts in the comments. It'll be interesting to read them.
On trial for justifying the Russian invasion and Kremlin crimes. In the Czech Republic, after 3 years of court proceedings, teacher Martina Bednarzová was finally punished for convincing her students that Russia was not doing anything illegal in Ukraine.
Bednarzová brought up the topic of Ukraine during a lesson for the 8th grade at the beginning of April 2022. She told the students that, from the Russian side, this was a justified way to resolve the situation and claimed that nothing was happening in Kyiv. When the students said that they had seen footage of the shelling of Kyiv on Czech television news, Bednarzová replied that state television is biased. She also stated that, in her opinion, Ukrainian Nazi groups in Donbas have been systematically destroying Russians since 2014.
She refused to comment on the accusations against her. Twice the court acquitted the teacher, but on the third attempt, the admirer of the Russian world was finally punished. She was sentenced to a suspended term with a 3-year ban on teaching. We thank the Czech Republic for its clear and correct stance. The Black Sea is under control, but not under Russia's control. The European Union plans to establish a security center in the Black Sea. Brussels explains this decision by the need to monitor key infrastructure and shipping facilities.
Against the backdrop of Russia violating airspace, attacking ports and shipping routes, and mining the sea, the central focus of this effort is on enhancing security in the region.
The establishment of the security center is part of Brussels' new Black Sea strategy, and it will focus on enhancing situational awareness and information sharing in the Black Sea, real-time monitoring from space and on the seabed, as well as early warning of potential threats. Where exactly this center will be located and which countries will join its creation is still unknown. Please like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our upcoming episodes.